Welcome to the IT Experience podcast. We're here to guide IT and global business services professionals in navigating experience management, focusing on how to optimize budgets and drive better business outcomes. Join us as we discuss the trends, tools, and strategies with top industry experts that are transforming the future of service delivery in large enterprises. This podcast is brought to you by HappySignals, the leading experience management platform for IT and global business services.
Hello and welcome to the HappySignals IT Experience podcast again. Today we have with us Sophie Hussey, who many of you may know because she has been very active on LinkedIn in the recent months and has a long experience in IT service management. So it's a great pleasure to have you with us today, Sophie.
Thank you very much for having me.
For those who don't know you, would you like to just introduce yourself briefly, what you do, who you are, etc.? Just a brief introduction to who you are, Sophie.
Absolutely. So, hi, I'm Sophie. I am a service management and leadership consultant. I have been working for myself for the last 3 years, but I've got just shy of 24 years experience working in technology. Actually, no, it may be slightly more than 24 now, thinking what the date is. And I talk all things service management, all things leadership. I'm very passionate about future-proofing service management and supporting opportunities for the younger generations so that they can find a career path that isn't necessarily about coding. So everything and anything to do with service management, everything to do with leadership, that's me. And yes, I post quite regularly on LinkedIn on a number of topics.
Great. So one of the things that you just mentioned there in the introduction was future-proofing service management. And I think that's actually a theme that a lot of our listeners also think about with all the different changes that have been going on and how it continues to just be change after change after change. And one topic that we touched upon in our pre-recording session was the importance of understanding the bigger picture. And I suspect that might also have something to do with future-proofing service management. So would you just like to go into why is it important to understand the bigger picture in service management?
Well, from the future-proofing side, there's like two parts to that. From the future-proofing perspective, we've got a lot of people in the service management world who are heading towards the sunset or at the sunset of their career, some fantastic names. But you don't see as many young and upcoming people coming in at the other end. Partly that's to do with the fact that there isn't enough in terms of education. Certainly in the UK, the UK computer science curriculum doesn't include anything to do with service management, which is madness. But we've got to make sure that we're setting people up for success in terms of career pathways, whether it's service management specific or any others in technology. Most people, when they're at school and they're learning about what options are available to them, they are told about infrastructure, some cybersecurity stuff. You get the obvious coding and being a developer. But there's a whole other career pathway in service management that's often overlooked or not even considered. And for me, service management, drop the IT. Service management is something that can be applied through anywhere in the organisation, and it can help various business functions or all business functions work in a cohesive, collaborative way. So for me, it's a massive sort of area, potential gap that we need to be filling and supporting businesses to consider how they're approaching things, as well as maybe apprenticeships and other things like STEM learning. I'm a STEM ambassador, which is volunteering for an organisation in the UK to get out to schools to try and encourage young people into technology. And for me, I'm being that advocate for service management, because had I known 24 years ago that this was a career pathway, I probably would have skipped the infrastructure years, which I'm not a natural techie. That was a bit of hard work. But there's a massive gap, and I think we need to drive more people or pull more people into the world of service management.
So speaking about gaps, what gaps would it fill if service management was a part of the curriculum in education? What do you think that is sort of the missing out on the young people that are now coming up in the IT world or tech world?
I think one of the main things really is the thinking about how a service is delivered. It's not about the code. It's not about what the app looks like or any of that sort of stuff. It's about the user experience and the colleague experience as well. So when you're talking about service management, you're always thinking about what value is it adding? What are you delivering to that end user, that customer? What objectives and outcomes are you delivering to? And it's a different mindset from just the coding. And I'm not negating the importance of doing the super technical roles, because they are vital. But if you have an understanding of how a service actually works and what the word service means, that is the biggest gap that we could eliminate, and make sure that then anybody who's working in a development role, or somebody's architecting, designing a service, they're always thinking with that customer hat on. What does it mean to that customer? What does it mean to that end user? And if it's adding value, because if it's not adding value, then maybe you don't need to worry about that bit of code. Maybe you need to do something else and focus in another area that is actually going to deliver those business outcomes.
And delivering those business outcomes, as this younger generation comes through, and maybe the lack of sort of new people now coming through, what do you think is the biggest reason why why service management isn't attracting more young people to it? I mean, like 24 years ago, if you would have known it existed, you would have gone that way. So what do you think is the thing that is missing from why there aren't more people coming through that way?
I think it's purely visibility, but also there is an element of some of the naming of job descriptions and vacancies out there. They don't necessarily correlate with what actually that person's doing in terms of service management, or some of the terminology is framework specific that it shouldn't be, because that's not the time and the place for it, if you see what I mean. But I think predominantly it's because people don't know the career pathway exists. So my eldest daughter did computer science at GCSE, which is like the 16-year-old exams in the UK. There was nothing in that course to do with service management. It was all about hardware, software, coding, nothing else.
So how, from your point of view, having done this for so long and also having been on the technical side in infrastructure, if you would think about that you would assemble a dream team of people to build an entirely new service that contains both the technical aspects and the service delivery and everything else, how big of a part, if roughly spoken in percentages, would you say that service management is of the entire? I know that it's not the question that we had sort of prepped in advance, but how would you say, like, how big is that part? I mean, if we think about the bigger picture, like how big is the service management part when you start delivering a service to end users?
I would say it's the biggest part of all, because it's not just the service itself. It's the processes used to manage it. It's the ways of working. It's how you're operationally doing things. The way I typically describe it is I describe it as a sandwich. So you've got the top layer of bread is service management, and the bottom layer of bread is information security or cybersecurity, because those are the overarching components. That's what holds everything else together. And then in the sandwich, the lettuce, the tomatoes, and the meat, whatever else, you've got your architecture, you've got your development, you've got infrastructure and everything else. So in terms of, it's tricky to say in percentage, but I would say it would be a higher percentage than people would expect, because most people, when they're thinking of technology services, the normal thought process is going to go to, well, the technology and the ones and the zeros, that's the thing that takes up most of it. But realistically, in the day-to-day, in order to operate that service, if you're making any changes to it, you've got change management. If there's something wrong with it, you've got problem management. If you're trying to figure out what's where and how, you've got asset management, configuration management, you've got your incident management. Everything that makes that thing work is service management.
It's quite fascinating, really. I mean, it's even having working in this space, it's sometimes it's easy to lose sight, because, and I'm looking at myself here, maybe it's a little bit of a siloed thinking as well, just thinking of all these different pieces as distinct separate parts working in their own silos, and yeah, I'm sort of getting a reality check here, because it's. I'm thinking about my own oldest son who is now 15 and thinking about going into the technology field, and knowing that it is the people aspect that is interesting to him. Maybe actually, like, have I talked to him about service management as an option rather than going down the other path? And as crazy as it may sound, but so maybe there's a lot of assumptions that we are aware of or not aware of. So you work in service management. What is it? What is usually the type of challenges that you go into organizations to solve when you go in there to consult the leadership or the people working in these roles?
Well, there's two parts to that. There's the ask of what they think they want, and then there's when I get in there, and then there is what they really want. So one of my clients, quite a large organisation, they wanted me to go in and help them set up their ITIL framework, so they had the processes in place, and they wanted to do the whole lot. So I went in, I did a little bit of a current state assessment, and I was like, okay, well, of all of these practices, you only use about 16. Everything else is in other parts of the organisation. So I'm not going to waste my time looking at those because there's no point. But actually, on top of these 16 that we're focusing on, you actually need help with talent management. You need help with a talent competency framework. You need help with operational risk management. You need help with some of the leadership side of stuff, and you need some mentoring for some of your senior leaders. So what I went in to do had a very clear remit, and because I work for myself, so very clear statement of works of these are your deliverables. But then I sort of branch out as I figure out from the people and the conversations, what is it they really need, and add a little bit more value here and there to expand upon the initial idea. And pretty much, I mean, that's one particular client, pretty much everywhere that I've worked, every client I've worked with, I would probably say, probably like 90% of them, that same thing happens. I go in with a clear deliverable that they want me to help them with, which is very service management focused, but then it branches out, and the people side of stuff and supporting the people and helping grow the talent in the teams, that is always the extra bit that they didn't realize they needed.
Why do you think they don't realize that they needed those parts?
I think quite often when people are too close to it, having that holistic view and being able to take a step back and think about the sort of holistic view of actually what is the problem here, or where are the challenges, not necessarily a problem, but where are the development areas. And I think people can be very, what's the right word? Protective almost, because when I'm going in there and I'm providing advice and guidance, it's not that what they've done is wrong. They've all started on really, really great foundations. They just need help taking up to the next level. But I think sometimes people can't necessarily see beyond. It's almost like a bit of silo thinking in that, or rose-tinted glasses or blinkers is the one. Do that quite a lot. Look, people are just looking. They're just staying in their lane. When in fact, if they just take stock for a minute. And it's like things when people are reviewing like a target operating model or their operating model. Most people seem to think that it's like a one-off thing that you do. You're just looking at your strategy once. You're just looking at your operating model once, but you're not. It's constantly. It's evolving all the time because you get new clients in as a business. Maybe you need to add to your team, or maybe the approach that you were taking wasn't the right one. And you've got to be able to evolve and adapt to what's going on in the same way as with some of our frameworks. You've got to adopt and adapt them to make the most value. But you can't do that if you are quite insular, if you're not looking at the bigger picture. And I think that's where consultants come in, because there's been a number of clients I've had where some of the members of the teams have said, we've been saying this for years, but the management aren't listening. And I'll laugh and say, well, that's the joys of bringing a consultant in, because I have no ties here. So I can say the same things as you guys. These are my observations too. But there's no skin in the game for me. I'm just here to support you. And there was one particular client recently that the teams said that quite often, like, we've been saying this for years, Sophie. I'm like, I know, but I can help you. I'll write in a report. I'll explain what needs to happen. But yeah.
It sounds actually quite similar to, I remember once having a conversation with John Nocter from the Service Desk Institute. And we were speaking about how looking at things like experience data such as what HappySignals collects, then he mentioned this percentage. He said that when you go in and you start really digging into how people feel about the services provided, then often when you start getting the data in, 70% of it is things that you instinctively already knew. 20% will be things that are sort of you had a hunch, but you were not sure, you didn't have anything to back it up. And then only 10% of the insights that you get from the data are actually sort of like this really big surprises. They might be impactful, but it is very similar to what you just mentioned, is that the teams, they know probably like what should be changing, but there hasn't been for some reason it hasn't just been the suitable circumstances or context for that message to get through so that change can happen. So there are probably assumptions here. There was one of the themes that we talked about in the pre-recording session was around assumptions, and we spoke also about like the value of really understanding where the face value of things were hiding the more important issues. So what you described there is one layer. Do you have other anecdotes of around sort of like the discrepancy between how things seem and how they really are, and maybe some of the ways that one could start tackling, uncovering those gaps or differences?
I think one of the things we spoke about in the pre-session was I often refer to it as a superpower, and you called it as a superpower of mine. When I'm working with other people, I can often see more than what the person is displaying outwardly. I'm quite empathetic in that respect, so I understand a lot more than what they're showing. And there have been many situations where, whether it is as a people leader, whether it's working for a particular client, where there is a situation that's going on and somebody is telling me, this is the thing, this is the most important thing. And then through questioning and using the powers of influence and your typical sort of open questions and doing a bit of probing, can often read between the lines. And the same thing applies actually, not just in like a verbal conversation, but also in written communication. There's a number of times that I will have received, more times than I would like to count, I will have received an email giving me some instructions of something to do that has maybe some context, but actually I can pick out key bits of information there that actually this is a problem. This is not. So, for example, if I was asked to create a report of a load of metrics to see how a service was performing, maybe the person who has written it has said something along the lines of, because the CIO has asked for something, or they're asking about a particular project and they want to know how things are going. On face value, it's just like, hey, here's this report, you need to do it, the big boss wants it. But actually, when you read the email again, the person that's asking me that question, they're worried about what this CIO wants. They're worried about this project. They're worried about the fact, is it on track? Is it not on track? They want to make sure that we're presenting the right information, that we're not doing the watermelon kind of reporting. And I typically use my stakeholder management skills to the nth degree, which I think that's actually helped me throughout all of my career, really. Just by asking questions. I find that by asking people open questions to get them speaking and then probing based on what their answer is to try and get to the crux of it. So I'm not expecting them to confess all sorts of things and how they're feeling in that particular moment. But if I can help them express what it is that they're worried about, what it is that they need to deliver, and try and take some of that pressure off, then that's where reading between the lines becomes a really, really powerful thing.
I can imagine that can be relieving even for the senior stakeholders that are in these organizations, to have somebody understand between the lines, because maybe that's their blind spot. They think that the issue is something, and maybe that's the thing that you've been called in to take care of. But then once you speak to them, and you do have a very good ability of reading between the lines and detecting sort of the real issues, because are those the ones then that become the key to unlocking situations that have been maybe hindering the organization from moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the interesting thing as well with the senior stakeholders is sometimes they will have a very clear vision of what it is that they want to do, but haven't. This is going to sound. I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this. I'm not going to say anybody's name, so it's okay. But sometimes they can be really, really focused on one endpoint, on one outcome, without considering the bigger picture. So this is where sort of my ability to come in as a consultant, I can say, are you sure? Are you sure that's what you want? Are you sure that's the direction you want to go? And I think by almost playing devil's advocate and asking the same probing questions, but in a slightly different way, it gives people pause for thought and think, actually, maybe I don't know the solution to the problem. Maybe there's an alternative way to go. But I think one of the other things as well, just hopefully not rambling, but one of the other things that I like to do, particularly when I'm working in sort of like a mentoring capacity with any of the people for my clients, is I always say it's a safe space. Whatever you say to me, I've got no skin in the game. You can say what you want about anybody, about anything. It doesn't impact me. I won't repeat anything unless I felt I needed to. And then if I felt I needed to, I'd tell you first. So I create that sort of psychologically safe space. So in that moment, if somebody wanted to tell me what was between the lines, they know that they can do it and it's not going to go any further.
Yeah. And I think if there was one thing that would tell a younger version of myself coming up through in the beginning of my career, it would be to tell that, just so you understand, many of these people that are sitting in these leadership positions are actually, it's a very lonely place to be, because there are not that many people that they can open up to, because they're expected to be and have all the answers. They're expected to not be faced by issues and by problems. And so it's not an easy place to be. And
No.
So you work with large organizations. I think all organizations will say that they're data-driven to some degree, and now especially with AI, then we want to bring in both synthetic data and AI analysis on everything. So what role does sort of the type of human-to-human understanding that you also represent have as we move into the coming years and of service management in these organizations?
I think the thing with data is it's way more advanced in terms of how you collate data and how you can interrogate data now compared to back in the day. But I could make the KPIs and the SLAs, not say whatever I wanted to because I wasn't going to lie about the information, but there are ways to make it look better than it is, or you can make it look worse than it is, or you can utilize the information based on what it is you're trying to achieve to influence in the right direction. Today, with the information, the sorts of information that's available to people, it's very clear cut in many respects, but at the same time, it still needs that human analysis of what does that actually mean. So if you're getting loads of data points and you can find out that for 97% of your services, your customers are happy, they're really pleased with the service they're receiving, there's no major areas to go between, but then you've got a 3%. So my thing there with the human side of it is I'd be looking at having conversations with some of the 3%. I'd be having that sort of sample conversation or focus groups to try and understand, okay, so the numbers say this, that looks positive, that's great, but here's my area, this little one here, that's my continual improvement opportunity area. I want to go and have a look there. I'm not really answering your question very well there, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't think you can have one without the other. I don't think you can have just data that says something without there being some sort of analysis. And as much as I like the use of AI, I think you can't use AI without a human being able to understand what that means and sense checking and verifying what it means. I think having that sort of oversight and that emotional sort of response or emotional investigation into what those numbers mean and what that actually quantifies or equates to in the business is vital. I think I think there's There's risks if you go too heavy down the human side, because then it's just going to be emotion led and there's not necessarily going to be any sort of decisions made on fact. But then if you go down the purely data side, you're making decisions based on numbers, but not necessarily taking into consideration the human side of it, the emotional side, and the people besides it. I think it's a very difficult balance to find between the two. I really don't think I answered your question there, but I tried my best.
No, but it is, and I can see how then one aspect that has intrigued me for many years is the role of incentives, and making reports say one thing or another often are around incentives, whether it's avoiding penalties or gaining rewards or just making your work look better or worse than whatever the goal is, but incentives. And then thinking about using too much data of one sort or the other, we spoke about safe space. So also, like, exposing your work, if it is very emotion based, exposing it to the hard facts can feel a little bit scary at first. But then, and if you are all in the hard data space, exposing it to actually seeing how people feel about those services or products can also be a scary thing. So is there a balance in, like, how would you go about if that was a challenge in an organization that you work with? How would you go about trying to find the balance?
I think the way I would approach it would be to understand where is the information coming from? How is it collated? Are you using any kind of tooling to collate information? Compared to things like focus groups where you're not collating data in the same way. It's going to be either through a recording or it's going to be somebody taking notes. Notes can be misinterpreted, all that sort of stuff. So I would strip it back to, where is my information coming from? Who is it coming from? Why have we asked them? What is it that we're trying to achieve by asking them these questions? And where is it we're trying to get to then figure out, right, is our line of data gathering the right one? Or are there things that we want to do differently and we want to approach it in a different way to make sure that we have a happy balance? It's like if you're doing a survey, you want a balance between open and closed questions. You want to find the sweet spot between the two. You don't want to lead anybody down a particular path. You want people to have the forum to say what they want. But if you just have purely open questions in a survey, that's not necessarily usable data. Not in the same way as a closed question is going to do. If you have your yes or no's, or you've got like a scale of 1 to 5 for something, that's data that you can utilize. But then that is added to through the weight of an open question. So you said you gave something 5 out of 5. You're super happy with the service, extremely satisfied. Why did you say that? Can you quantify it? And then through that kind of interrogation of why are you saying what you're saying? Why is the data that allows that opens up some avenues for further investigation. Like so if somebody said they were extremely happy or extremely annoyed with the service, what's the next step? What could we have done better? Can we improve it? I think the only risk is if going down the sort of survey as a data gathering sort of opportunity, the risk is doing it too much. You don't want to do it too much, you don't want to do it too little, because I know certainly back before, a little plug for HappySignals, before we used HappySignals in a previous life, we used just a basic CSAT questionnaire survey at the end of, I think it was every ticket, and it was just a 1 to 5, and there was no interrogation of the data, and it didn't mean anything, and people were so fed up with doing it. You either had a mass of people just clicking 3 or whatever it was in the middle, and you can't use that data, or there was no response at all. Whereas when we moved to use a tool that asked more poignant questions, that drove the data collation in a different way, which was, again, a plug for you guys, which was HappySignals, it meant that it was a better sort of experience for that user to provide that data, but also at the back end, we could drill down and figure out, oh, that person said, oh, there's a trend here. Oh, there's an office here that are really not happy, or a department that's not really happy. What's going on here? Let's investigate the services. So I think it's all about, going back to the original question, I went off on a tangent again. It's all about considering where are you getting your data from, and is your approach to gathering this information that you're going to use to allow you to make decisions, is that solid information? Is that the right data sources to be using? And if not, think outside the box. Where do we go next?
So as we are having these conversations, I'm starting more and more to think of you almost like a mediator. Like a mediator between the leadership and the people working in the organization, the young people coming into the industry, and the ones who have now at the latter end of their careers, between the human data points and the hard data points, between the infrastructure piece and the very customer-facing interface between the people in the service management support roles and the end users. So how do you feel about this type of sort of characterization? Like, do you see yourself as a mediator? And I mean, if you can read well between the lines, which I know that you can, does that actually then help you to sort of connect people on in a different way than they would be able to without you being the mediator in the middle?
I think that is a very good way to describe the sorts of things that I do. There have been many organisations, both as a permanent person and as a consultant, where you've got warring, not literally warring, but warring teams that they can't seem to have that conversation. And in comes Sophie, and I'm like, oh, tell me about your problems. Oh, that's interesting, because they've told me they have the same problem. Would you mind? Let me just go get so and so. Yeah, well, do you know, these guys have said this, and there is a lot of that sort of mediation, negotiation. I think one of the things that we were saying before, the hardest thing to work with is people, but the best thing I get to work with is people. Yeah. So it's like a strange sort of conflicting thing. But being able to positively influence people, to solve the problems, to remove any of the challenges, to remove some of the silos, to encourage that sort of cohesive, these are the words I say quite a lot with clients, a cohesive, collaborative environment. That, to me, if I can do that by being that mediator, then I know I've succeeded, because the tools that I'm giving people and encouraging them to use, as well as the knowledge of how to do things in a service-focused mindset, will set them up for years. I've mentored a lot of people over the years, and there's been a couple of who have said things along the lines of the stuff that I learned from you, I've applied throughout my career, and it served me well. If I can do that sorts of thing, I don't need the glory myself, but I want to help. I want to help do exactly that, to mediate, to remove some of the problems and keep people on that evolution and that growth journey to deliver sort of successful services in the best possible way, and with the customer at the heart of everything they do, whether it's an internal customer or external.
That's interesting. So almost, would you say that if there are leaders or people representing organizations in the audience, and they're thinking about, how would this sounds interesting, but what would be type of symptoms that I might look out for in my organization that could mean that I could use somebody like Sophie or somebody like you to act as a mediator, to unlock those locks and to get the organization working towards the same goals in a cohesive and collaborative environment. So what are some of the symptoms that you might recognize telling that there is a need for an external person to come in?
I think, that's a really good question. I think there are a number of things. It could be as simple as you've got a number of risks, and some of the risk events, things are happening that they shouldn't be happening. So things like your control mechanisms aren't working, or it could, like change management. Change management is always one where you often have people that don't get on well with that one. It could be a case of, from a colleague experience and engagement perspective, the results are we're not feeling that we feel isolated, we're not feeling connected to the wider teams, we don't understand the strategy. It could be any sort of number of things, whether it's process specific or people specific, unlikely to be technology, anything to do with major incidents or anything like that, with the exception of if there's human error. or if there's some sort of processing related in the background, because the tech is the tech. I think, realistically, anything sort of process where things aren't going as well, or it could be even as simple as we can't deliver projects on time. No project is delivering on time. I'm not a project manager. I can deliver projects, but if you can't deliver projects on time, what part of your process isn't working effectively? Is there something to do with the handover to operational services that isn't working? In which case, you've probably got to throw it over the fence kind of thing, and you need somebody to help you with your process, to help you with your people, to smooth the way so that you can get all of those pieces working together nicely.
So a little bit like making a little bit of oil in the cogs, getting the machinery to work as intended rather than as is maybe a less than optimal reality today.
Yes, you probably don't need a whole new cog. You just need a little bit of oil here and a little bit of this, and maybe tighten up that screw here, and then everything's working nicely.
Sounds very good. Well, I hope that we have been able to now give a few thoughts to the listeners around, and I definitely now got thinking about like how maybe we could make service management more visible, and on a very personal level, should I maybe be speaking to my oldest son about service management, and maybe that could be an option for his career as well. So thank you very much for coming, Sophie. This was a wonderful conversation, and I really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
And how do people find you if they want to get in touch?
The best way to find me is on LinkedIn. My profile name is literally just Sophie Hussey. There's also my website, lapisconsulting.com. And if you really want to, you can find me on Instagram as well, under Sophie Hussey.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And as it is our custom, we always wish for people to stay happy and to stay safe.
If you liked this episode, please give us thumbs up, rating, or share it with your colleagues to help others learn about this topic as well. To learn more, go to HappySignals.com.